Good day, this is Terry Difazio, and you're watching Dial It Up. Today, my guest is Amy Hornblas, and she is a health educator who is the author of the Vermont Mask Survey. Pleasure to have you on, Amy.
Thank you for having me so much.
How did you come about doing this survey, or did somebody contract you to do it, or how was this whole thing?
No, the idea came to me when I was in my garden
Oh.
back in June.
Okay.
But I think probably the reason why it came to me, I've been really doing a lot of thinking about this, about why me and why am I doing this project? Why is this such a big passion of mine? And I have a very varied work history. I started out doing a lot of food service, and I've done that throughout my time. So I know a lot about, foodborne illnesses and keeping surfaces clean and serving the public. But then I've also worked in nursing homes. I spent a summer working in a nursing home up in Berlin, Vermont, and when I was in college, and I've spent a lot of time in veterans, VA hospitals and things, because I have a loved one who spent a lot of time in those. And so I know how lonely it can be in those places, how folks just sort of wheel their wheelchairs out, just to be near the nurse's station and see other people walking by and see that activity. So I started to get concerned this spring when I was hearing that people were being shut into their nursing homes, people weren't allowed to have visitors. And I worked in group homes. I worked a lot with people with developmental disabilities, so I'm familiar with cleft palate syndrome and types of surgeries people have to have, how difficult it is, with drooling and swallowing and breathing. I also know a lot about asthma and lungs and how they work, and, biology. I teach about tobacco prevention and why we need to take good care of our lungs. And I have also done a lot of work with trauma survivors. I've worked in the fields of sexual and domestic violence with children and adults. And then all of my work in domestic and sexual violence led me into trying to do some prevention work around those topics. And so I was going into the schools and I was trying to prevent violence. And I realized that the kids were going home and watching TV shows every day that was teaching them to be violent and to bully and making that all look funny and thrilling and playing video games. So I started researching media literacy, and I learned a lot about how the media affects the brain, and I developed a program to try to address that. And then I became a health educator, and I teach people about hand washing. I teach hundreds and hundreds of people a year, how to wash their hands, how to cover their sneeze, why we're covering our sneezes and coughs, how far the germs can go. I also have been involved in the HIV and AIDS, epidemic, since the beginning in the early 90s. I started doing, prevention in the community around that, and so really understanding how the virus spreads and how to prevent it. And so when masks were first proposed, back in the spring when we were first all sent home.
In March or April, wasn't it?
Yeah. I was just sort of dumbfounded, just based on my experience, knowing how many of my students have asthma, for example, how many of my loved ones have COPD, how difficult that would make the breathing. But mostly, my instinct was that for people with trauma or any kind of trauma history, strangulation, or just the fear of not recognizing people around you. Plus, we had just put our whole culture through a separation, through a trauma, by sending the kids home and locking people in the nursing homes and group homes. And so I felt like to add to the trauma, to add to that sense of separation and that lack of intimacy and connection with others, I'm aware of psychologically, what that can do. I've worked in mental health as well.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
In the nursing homes, now, are these people locked in their rooms 24 hours a day?
See, I'm not sure. That's something I've not been able to look into. I just haven't had the time, but it's really heavy on my heart, and I think about it a lot.
Well,
I'm hearing that they are not allowed to congregate, not for meals or anything, which is making me feel like we used to just, even if people couldn't wheel themselves to the nurses' station, we would wheel them out to the common area, so that they could be part of things. I imagine that's not happening, and I don't know if they're having to wear masks. That is one area I would love to know more about. If the survey that I'm doing, I will mention in a few minutes too, but it is ongoing. So if anybody wants to fill out a survey, I would love to have some information about that.
The reason I asked is I've heard that they are in their rooms 24 hours a day, food's brought to them or whatever.
I just can't even, I've heard that too, I can't
If that is true, for anybody out there watching this, if that is true, if you are a criminal in a supermax prison, you are only locked in 23 hours a day, and they let you out 1 hour a day for recreation.
Because otherwise it's torture.
Yeah.
I know,
So,
this is horrible. So even though there are a lot of biological reasons and, physical health reasons, and I can get into the breathing, I'd like to explain that a little bit more.
Sure.
That's a real danger, But for me, what really pulled me into this was the psychological, social effects. The first thing I thought of, I was raised Jewish. I had my bat mitzvah and everything. And I remember early on, I was in elementary school, one of my Sunday school teachers was a Holocaust survivor. She had the numbers on her arm and everything. And she explained, I remember the impression that she instilled in us as students. It was really important that we understood, she felt, that it was what happened before the Holocaust. That was the most terrifying part, was the way her neighbors turned on her. Mm-hmm. The way people just shut off their empathy and really, that was the domino, that was what started it. And that was kind of the most frightening, most chilling, most hurtful part. And that's what I saw right away. I said, oh my goodness, we're going to increase bullying. This is just like putting everybody on social media all the time. It takes that personalization and intimacy away so that people are more likely to act in violence. And there's evidence showing that in my report.
I have issues with my bank, who has now closed its lobby. Mm-hmm. So in other words, if you want to make a deposit or cash a check, you're outside.
Yeah.
And you have to talk to somebody through a window, even though they had plexiglass up.
Right.
In the place, and they were, and masks also, I suppose. So I'm wondering, how impersonal is this making us?
Yeah. Well, so I'm doing a survey. It's called the Vermont Mask Survey. What happened was the World Health Organization, because I want to get back to that. I want to tell you about something in the report.
Yep.
The World Health Organization came out with a report in June, some interim guidance on mask use, and this is all of the sources I might mention here today are all cited in my report. I came out with an initial report, a fall report, because I was getting so much information, and really this is so urgent, I didn't feel like I could wait for more data, and I had a good amount of data. So, but I am continuing through the winter to collect data, and I'll come out with another report. So, so I cite all of this on my website and everything in the report. And so the World Health Organization said that if decision-making bodies, decision makers, were going to say that masks should be used in the general public, which has never been recommended before, that they should be collecting data on its effectiveness and on its potential costs, its risks. And then they listed a whole list of likely disadvantages. Mm-hmm. And this was all based on research, and so that's one thing that a lot of people push back on, is people don't seem to be looking at the actual evidence when it comes to this stuff.
Yeah, but yet people who are pro-mask are saying, you're the selfish one, you're not reading the science.
Right, and the science is very clear that it's not clear on the benefits of masks.
No.
And it has not even been looked at as far as disadvantages and costs in the general public. Mm-hmm. It has been looked at in healthcare providers, though. And so basically what the World Health Organization is asking people to do, and this is what we do with every health intervention we ever think of. Okay. We want to weigh the costs to the benefits, because you might have something that's 100% effective. Like if we all put, and I hate to say this is kind of graphic, but if we all put plastic bags on our heads, we would 100% stop any, any virus, any dispersion, 100%. However, the costs, I'm pretty sure we could all agree without very many studies, would outweigh that.
Of course.
And so, of course, I know I'm taking an extreme example, but masks decrease, the breathing transfer of air by about a third. We're guesstimating based on studies of N95s. Mm-hmm. We don't have studies of all the apparatus people are wearing now, so we'd have to do that. But a third over a period of time, and that's one thing when we get into the results of my study, that the length of time that people are wearing them seems to be definitely, as you'd imagine, increasing the health effects.
Did you have trouble finding people to do the survey?
No. So, a little bit. So I really wanted it to be a little bit difficult because I didn't want to get flooded with a bunch of, bogus data. And so I also wanted to get, real sincere data, not just people off the cuff. So I didn't want to do it online. I didn't want to make it some really quick thing. I also wanted, I was also very concerned about confidentiality. Mm-hmm. Because, as I uncovered through doing this study, there's a huge bias against even discussing this topic. It's a huge taboo.
And of course, yes.
I'm not sure how that happened. And that's where I might get back into media literacy if we have time. Maybe I'll just launch into it now. When I was researching media literacy and violence in the media, this was back in the late 1990s. Shows like CSI and NCIS were coming on the air.
Yep.
Do you remember those? Crime scene investigators, and all those kinds of shows. So I was a prevention educator as well as an advocate for survivors, and I'd go to court with people and things like that. But then I'd go in the classrooms and try to decrease violence and raise people's awareness of this issue. Well, of course, every time I went in to talk, especially with youth, CSI would come up and, what about DNA testing and what about all this stuff? And they thought those shows were real. And, I had to explain to them that, that's futuristic technology if it's ever going to exist. At the time it was futuristic. DNA testing at the time was not, there was a chance it was wrong. I mean, it's not a certainty. I don't know if it is now. I haven't kept up with that research. But at the time, there could definitely be false, links through DNA state. It's not a fail-safe.
I just know of two lawyers in New York City who have actually gotten people off prison sentences because they've used DNA to help prove that they weren't there.
Yeah.
And that wasn't theirs. And I think it's Peter Neufeld and Barry Scheck with the two from New York City. But now DNA is a lot more precise, isn't it?
It probably is, and I haven't continued. I haven't been in that field for a few years, so I don't know. But that's a good example. And so what happened was they actually diagnosed and came up with a name for this: the CSI effect that was being had in juries that were hearing cases around this time, right? Because they were believing the television version, mm-hmm. And not understanding that it didn't match the real science, but people believed it so strongly that they were having a hard time finding juries who could be objective. Well, I think we're in that situation now. We've got a media that instead of giving information and data, and citing their sources. I mean, I can't tell you how many people trying to prove to me that masks are effective have sent me like a New York Times article, right? Or a BBC article that doesn't have any sources. Or they link, their sources are themselves. They link to their own articles. Or you follow up the source and you read the actual study and it doesn't say at all what the journalist said it said. Mm-hmm. And so these things are being completely taken out of context. Not necessarily lying, but completely out of context.
Would it be fair to say that the general news media, whether it be CNN or Fox or MSNBC or any of the networks, even ABC, NBC, CBS, mm-hmm. would it be fair to say that they're more in the entertainment business rather than the actual reporting of the news?
Yes. Well, they're telling people how to feel and how to think. They're telling you how to feel and think. That we shouldn't have. If I explain to you that 1,000 children, if I just say this data, which is true, 1,000 children die of poverty every hour on our planet. Every hour. Children. Mostly under the age of 2. And that was before these shutdowns and all of which we know that's probably doubling now. Mm-hmm. I don't have to tell you how to feel about that, right? And so when the media is telling us how to feel, I think probably one of the main things that qualified me to do this study was I don't have a TV. Mm-hmm. I wasn't watching television. I didn't even have a computer at home with internet when this whole thing happened, when the shutdown happened. I had to get it because I could no longer go to work and use the computer there, and I had to work from home. So I have internet now. And the first thing I did when I hooked up that internet in March was I went to these sources. I went to the CDC. I went to the World Health Organization. I looked at the numbers. I went right to the study. I mean, we have to really go right to the sources. And so I have people saying things to me like, I'm seeing a graph, and I'm seeing cases going up, and I'm seeing numbers, and they're panicking. And they don't even know what the definition of the word case means.
Yeah,
they don't know what those numbers are, and they don't know how they relate to other numbers. So I really think we need to be thinking, I'm able to look at the data and I'm able to analyze it in a sensible way, and we need more people who can do that. We need to remember. I'm really worried that we're going to lose science through all of this, because if we're going to call things science that are not, and we're going to demonize people for looking at actual science, I mean, there's a reformation going on in the scientific community here that it's bone chilling, because it took us so long to get to this point. And so part of my history too is that I've studied the history of the medical system, the history of medicine, going way back. And when medicine and doctors and physicians were trying to take away the jobs of midwives, and the women in the community who were doing the healing, when the doctors wanted to come in and you had to have a license, you had to be approved, they were killing people, because they weren't washing their hands when they went from one person to the next. Mistakes are made, even by people with good intentions. So the field, there's a long history of people making mistakes and causing lots of death and suffering.
Yeah, we could get into all of that, but I did want to ask, how many people have you surveyed so far?
Okay, so yeah, the survey. Oh, if you don't mind. Can I go grab it?
Why, certainly.
I did forget. Oh my goodness. I brought everything over to the table except the survey. Yes, thank you. Yeah, so I'm asking people to fill out a survey. I went around and hung up posters all around Vermont. I went in like 7 different directions on 7 different days and hung up posters asking people to go to the website, vtmasksurvey.com, and fill out a survey telling me about their experiences with these 7 health difficulties, which are the likely health difficulties that people are likely to experience according to the World Health Organization and studies, which I cite in the report. So I had, let's see.
We're going to get contact information so people can contact you and get their hands on this information, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Just go to vtmasksurvey.com. And there's an email address there. It's vtmasksurvey@mail.com, but that's all on the website. Yeah, so people go there and they can find the survey, they can take the survey, and people either mailed it in or took a picture of it or saved the PDF and emailed it in. And so I got 62 individual survey responses. 21 of those responses reported having difficulties every time. So let me tell you about the 7 difficulties. So the 7 difficulties that I asked about were headaches, difficulty breathing, skin irritation, difficulty communicating clearly, physical discomfort, mental emotional discomfort, and difficulty cleaning your hands every time you touch your mask. And I asked people to rate those. Do you experience this every time you wear your mask? Do you experience this half the time? Do you experience it occasionally or never? So it was a 4-point scale. And so 21 of the respondents said that they experienced 3 or more of these difficulties every time. And so they were experiencing difficulties every time. And then I had another cohort of, I guess it was 31 respondents who said that they experienced difficulties only occasionally or never. And then I had 10 respondents who said never. So because, this is how you do, this is a scientific method, my objective was to find out about people who are experiencing difficulties. So the 10 people who responded who said they were never experiencing difficulties, I put those in a separate category because that wasn't the question. That's not what we're surveying. We don't ask able-bodied people. We don't ask the population, is our community accessible enough? And because the able-bodied people, all said yes, and there's more of them, then we're going to just, say, oh, well, then there's no accessibility issue, right? I mean, you have to be able to hear from the minority, too. And so this was really focused on a specific population. And so then I also teased apart the people who experience difficulties every time versus the ones who only experience difficulties occasionally or never, because there seem to be different degrees. And it's certainly true. Some people can smoke and not experience as many difficulties and live, as long as they would have. And then other people smoke and they don't, right? And
exactly,
so that doesn't make the people who are smoking and having the health issues invalid, right? So I separated those out, and I was able to get some really good data by doing it that way. It turns out that the people who experience difficulties every time, most of them had to wear them for work. That was one of the questions.
Would be like a healthcare worker or a hospital worker or a nursing home worker?
Right, I didn't ask, so here was the challenge, was I wanted this to be as confidential as possible. I was really worried, and people still are. I'm still getting responses from people who, I just got one the other day from someone in the healthcare field, someone in construction. Their jobs are on the line by complaining about this. We have people in jobs, right? This is really what one of my biggest takeaways from this is we have a working class that's basically trapped now in a work environment that has below OSHA standard amounts of oxygen available to them and higher CO2 levels underneath that mask for 5 days a week on average, 8 hours a day. This is serious. And that's one of the main reasons why I did do the survey as well, is I was hearing from essential workers in the early days when we were first allowed to come out and buy groceries and things that they were suffering.
Now, is this going to be published?
No. What?
The state, in
I've
other words,
sent it to the state. I've sent it to every health department.
so the state of
in the
Vermont isn't
state.
interested in this, huh?
They're not interested in talking about this side of it at all. I just heard Dr. Levine talking the other night, and what his main focus and seems to be on, same with other leaders in our community, is on compliance. Are people following these rules? That's all they're really. That's all I hear them really focused on.
Yeah, isn't
They
that-
don't seem to have any interest in this, and the whole thing is, stop complaining. We're sick of hearing people complain about wearing masks. Just mask up.
Yeah, and it's gotten very
It's frightening.
personal in the fact that you're actually vilified if you don't wear one.
Right. I just had an email last night that I was reading to Vermont Mask Survey, and the person is saying that people who don't wear masks are killing innocent people.
I've heard that one
That's
too.
an allegation of murder. I mean, I don't know what slander laws are, I mean, but that's a pretty big slanderous thing to say. And I'd love to see if there was any evidence of that. Unfortunately, there is not. The reactions that we're getting from people are really over the top. If they were to look at the World Health Organization report, this interim report that they came out with in June, and there have been no newer studies that change this fact, okay? They say, at the present time, the widespread use of masks by healthy people in the community setting is not yet supported by high quality or direct scientific evidence, and there are potential benefits and harms to consider. I have in Alberta, Canada, their Department of Health comes out with a report. I cite that too. Dr. Levine has said himself, and I cite that in my report. You can go to the link that I give during one of the press conferences where he answers the question from the press. No, there is no evidence of the effectiveness of masks. There is circumstantial evidence, and then he goes on to explain. There are these mathematical models. There are studies of whole populations of countries. Those kinds of studies, that level of scientific study is not meant to be conclusive.
Isn't the person who actually made this PCR test, is it? He actually said it wasn't designed to actually diagnose anything.
Yeah. And so people really need to start going to the sources. They really need to start fact-checking. Like, for example, Democracy Now! Had an episode where Amy Goodman said something like, a new report says that if we had mandated masks from the beginning, we could have saved, and she said some huge number, I can't remember, some astronomically huge, amazing number. Yeah. And so I went and looked up that study, and it turns out, that it was, it's published, it's a mathematical model, first of all. Okay, so mathematical models, as we know from weather predictions, are unreliable, and it all depends on what variables you put into that model. And real life, and human bodies and nature are way more complex. We could never factor in all that stuff, which is why they're not conclusive. They can only help either guide or back up, other more conclusive studies. And so this study was a mathematical model. It was published on a website that had just been developed a year ago. And you can go on YouTube and find the people talking about why they started the website. And they say right there, and even on the website, they say, do not use this for conclusive evidence. This website was developed to put preliminary studies, unvalidated studies, out there so they can be discussed, knowing The publishers knew that there's a risk that people might take these seriously, but they shouldn't, right? And who was partly behind funding this website? Bill Gates.
Yes,
right.
That was
and one other
answer.
person I can't remember, who's
That was
tied
going to
into
be
all
my
this.
answer.
So our media right now is probably largely funded by big pharma,
Yeah.
by pharma stuff. And so we have to keep that in mind, that our news, I started researching this 30 years ago. I mean, even going way, way back, our news and our health segments on our news are often advertisements. I don't know if people have been aware of this, but this has been going on for a very long time.
Yes, I noticed that with like the Dr. Oz show. It's essentially a commercial for something.
Right, and then all the side effects, right? And we've been concerned about the programming that might be doing. When you watch these commercials with these fluffy images and they're listing off death, seizure, all these things can happen to you. Well, now when we go to work, we have to say, do I have a fever? Do I have a cough? What are these things doing for pharmaceutical sales? What are these side effects from wearing these masks? What kinds of pharmaceuticals are being prescribed for these side effects? There's a lot of money to be made here, is all I'm saying. And I'm from New York like you, and we learned follow the money, right? And location. When you've got people's 24-hour, 7 days a week monopoly of their attention, that's power. And so when anybody like us tries to just reason with folks, it's interesting how often they get angry.
Very much so.
They yell, they raise their voice, they start talking about the president for some reason. I'm not even going to say the T word because it's become almost like a psychological effect, and people are very angry. And this is, how many times has it been said that this is all, the mask issue is a political issue? This is, I don't know where that came from. This has nothing to do with politics.
Most everything is political now, unfortunately.
But it's, right, but it's a smoke screen, I believe. It's another way to divide us. I'm really concerned about the way our leaders are encouraging this division. They're encouraging this mob mentality that first sent chills down my spine of the whole pre-Holocaust situation. It's almost like witch trials here. I mean,
yes,
it's
definitely.
really getting dark and scary really fast.
Well, you were talking about pharmaceutical things, and I did read this. This came from RFK Jr. You know him. He said the CDC is not an independent agency. It actually holds patents on 20 vaccines and makes about $4.6 billion a year.
Follow the money.
So I've never had any faith in the CDC, and after the show's over, I'll tell you why. But this plays right into what you were talking about. Plays right into what you were saying about Big Pharma and how they can, and they do control the media. If you look at any news broadcast, you'll find tons and tons of new prescription for this, and the side effects are this long.
Right.
And what it actually helps is about this much.
Right. And so really, I mean, if people could just, for a few moments, try to have some empathy. I'm really finding that hard to find amongst people. They're willing people seem to think the risk of not wearing a mask is so huge that we should literally put plastic bags on our heads if that's what it takes. And that's not logical. We can't be decision making when, clearly when we're acting out of fear.
Oh, of course not. And we're getting close to the end of time. I want to will you once more list your website and your email, and I will put that up on the screen for everybody.
Yeah, sure. It's vtmasksurvey.com.
Okay.
Made it as easy as possible.
And your email?
That's on the website as well.
Oh,
so it's really easy to find. You can go right to vtmasksurvey.com and you can find the email address. You can find the survey. You can take the survey. You can find posters to help me advertise for the survey, and it is ongoing. And any resources people have, any studies that they find, if they can send it, please, if you have evidence of the effectiveness of masks, that's great to send too. But not just journalists,
anecdotal evidence is not evidence.
Right, not just a newspaper article, a study.
It always kills me on Facebook when I see, well, I know one person who got very sick and they were 20 years old and they didn't have any underlying condition. One person, right? But the death rate is, the chance of recovery is like, 99.7% of the people who get this virus.
Well, and it just brings me back to poverty and malnutrition and all the things I know contribute to these pre-existing conditions that make you more likely to die of everything. We're making all of those worse.
Oh, yes.
With what we're doing.
I want to thank you. We've run out of time.
Yes, that was so fast.
I'll tell you what, we'll have you back again in, say, January.
Okay.
Sometime. I have somebody else coming in too from over in the Burlington area. I don't know if you know, what is it? I can't, Peter Garatano. And anyways, he's you know, doing something not exactly like what you are, but he's going to come on. And I would like to have you back in January, though. Would you be willing to do that?
Yes, because I would love to get more into the symptom, you know, the side effects, negative health effects, and explain why that is, so that people can understand.
I want to thank you very much, Amy, for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for offering this opportunity to the community. This is fantastic.
We want everybody to watch this. It'll be on YouTube. This is Terry Difazio for Dial It Up, saying this has been a great half hour. I hope you'll watch it, and we'll catch you on the flip side. Bye now.